Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. But right now, I'm teaching Zettelkasten, and today I have a really interesting question that comes to us from Erica. Erica's working with the bib card, and she's reading syntopically. So she's reading one book and expects to have other follow-on books coming later that will cover the same general field, but provide different insights and information. She's reached a spot on a bib card where she would like to ask the author a question, which of course you don't get to do. And so her question to me was, how do you handle that when you suddenly have a question in the middle of your reading? She made a suggestion, which is exactly what I would definitely do. I completely agree with her. She said, should I write the question maybe in a different color of ink? Absolutely. But I also suggest that you not stop there. So this is a new practice for me because I just recently went through a time when I was struggling to find a question that I knew I had written on some bib card, and it would not come back to me which one it was. And I had just been of the mind that, by golly, the next time this happens, I am going to make a main card for my question. I think a question deserves a main card absolutely as much as an insight. My thinking behind that is that if I have a question and it's over there on some bib card, is it going to come back to mind when I finally figure out the answer? The answer was no, it wasn't. I knew it was there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. But it's also, when it's out of sight, it's out of mind in terms of looking for the answer. In this case, the answer kind of came to me so squarely that I remembered the question. That's not always going to be the case. So I think it deserves its own card, and I'm going to show you how I would do it because I retroactively today made the card. I found it. Took a lot of digging, but I finally found the question where it actually was. And today, belatedly, I'm making a main card with that question. So let me give you the background for the particular example, but the real meat of it is going to be, well, how are we going to formulate that question card? But just so that we're all on the same page, the book that I was reading when the question came up was Dan Rahm's book, Show and Tell. And he does a wonderful job in this book explaining a lot of the principles of how to do a very excellent presentation. And in particular, on one particular page, and I did make a note of it on the bib card, it's this right here, this where my little marker is. And he makes the remark that getting it is the ultimate rush. When we suddenly see something we've been struggling to understand, we get a blast of dopamine equal to a huge slice of chocolate cake. It's our own brain rewarding us for making sense of complexity. Well, I was fascinated by that enough to include it on my bib cards. Well, I really liked that book. As you can see, I ended up making 6 bib cards to cover all the material on that book. And in particular, when we go to the cards, I'll show you this one. This particular card covered that question. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and switch cameras so I can show you the cards that I made and how I would handle a question. Okay, here are the set of bib cards that I made for the Dan Rahm book. There's 6 of them. The one in question where I posed this question happened to be card number 3 of 6. And I showed you the page in the Dan Rahm book. Here's the quote that I copied down from the Dan Rahm book. And here's my question. I wanted to know, what character trait does getting it fall under? And I came to the conclusion of what character trait that was over the weekend, but I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to get sidetracked. I'm going to deal with it specifically as an open question because that is Erica's question. So now, if I had been using the mechanism that I promised myself I am going to use from now on, I would make a main card to go with that question. Now in the main card, I would give the source being the same as the source for any note that came out of a bib card. I would use the quote up top as the information that I got from the author, and my question I would use as my reflection, my response to that information. And then my tagline should enable me to remember the whole card. But especially important, if I have to compromise at all, I want that tagline to convey my question, because it's my question that's hanging out there. So here my tagline is want to know, character trait of getting it. Now, because this is a main card, I will want to place this card in my Zettelkasten as a main card. So where's it going to go? So at this point, I pull out the index and I begin looking up these keywords. It's my new practice lately, and it's working out really well, to list my candidate parent cards on the back side of the main card, because then they're very handy. If I want to get back to them at another time, I don't have to look them all up again. And I diligently pulled each of these main cards. In yesterday's podcast, when I did a similar exercise, I found, several of them that could just as easily have been the parent card. And that was an amazing quote by Julianne Scherer, where it turned out to be a connector of several different conversations in my Zettelkasten. Well, not so exciting with this one. It turns out there's a clear conversation that this one fits into, and I've selected this one parent card, but I want to show you something about the whole conversation because it really ties beautifully in with the conversation that's happening right here. Now, one of the things that you can see here, this is an old 3x5 card. You know it's old because of the size. I switched quite some time ago to 4x6 cards. But look at this card also. It's almost blank. What are we doing with a main card that's almost blank? Well, in my earlier days, I would create these title cards to head up a subdivision. And no source, no complete thought. They were just a title to cover a subdivision. I don't do that anymore because mostly these cards just take up space and they don't really give me anything back of value. It's the main cards themselves that are of value. But here it is, and because of the order of things, I can't get rid of it because it has 4 child cards. Now, another interesting factor, when I pulled this conversation out, it looked like this. And I realized, I haven't been back to this section in quite a while. I don't have a directory card to go with this card. So I belatedly, just today, made the directory card. Whenever I bump into them, they're so valuable to have these directory cards that I will, if I'm adding anything to that section at all, I will go ahead and make the directory card. Because here you can see a very fascinating conversation that's going on. This heading card says that humor is made up of a surprise and a connection. Now, one of the challenges with putting something like this down there is you're almost laying down a rule. Everything that comes under this shall be about humor. Well, which it isn't. If you've got a Zettelkasten, then it's got to be free to make whatever connections are natural. And they're not always going to be in the same category. And in fact, with this new card we're adding, we are about to bust that category. So that's another lesson in and of itself. If you use categories, They're only there to help you get started with card placement, because later on new cards are going to come in and make associations, and they're going to shatter your categories, and that's okay. You must never say, oh, I can't place this main card here with the parent that it wants to go with because it doesn't fit the category. That would be a sad backwards waste, because a Zettelkasten isn't about categories, just to get you going as a helper. Categories are just a helpmate. Okay, so here's the conversation that's going on that's about humor. And the various cards talk about there being an interesting factor that you have to have a healthy right brain in order to do the coherence part, the connection part. And the left brain apparently processes the surprise element. So you've got a division there. And then getting a joke makes a connection between a coherent element and a surprise element. And that's why sometimes the punchline of a joke is called a surprise line. So this is a complete, very interesting, complete conversation going on here. And we're about to bust into this conversation right here. Getting a joke makes a connection. Our new card chose this card as its parent. As you know, the child card does not have to tell you why it chose a particular card as its parent, but we kind of figured out quite well, because getting it and getting it, that's a close element, and we're definitely making a connection with something when we get it, and so we have getting it and making a connection. The only piece that's different is it a joke? Well, a joke gives you kind of a dopamine rush, and so does getting it give you a dopamine rush. Now we see a connection that tells us something. We're seeing from this statement of Dan Rum, now he doesn't provide a footnote for this, so we're going to be probably having another question come up. Where did that come from? But we can see that part of getting a joke is probably the dopamine rush of making that connection. So we get to understand a joke quite well. And Dan Rum is making a presentation. He's not necessarily making a joke, although you can tell jokes in the middle of a presentation. He's claiming that if you leave a gap, that you set it up, but you don't close the gap, and you let your audience come to the conclusion for themselves, they're going to go, oh, I get it. And that's going to wake them up and give them a sense of dopamine, and it's going to associate your presentation with that sensation that's as good as a piece of chocolate cake, and that's going to get attached to your presentation. So these two cards are definitely related, and this new card is going to be a child card of this card here. And now there it is set up. So now when I index this card and I go in and I make my indexes around character traits and getting it, this will be installed into my index in a way that will help me be able to connect to it when I figure out what character trait getting it is all about. So I hope you enjoyed that session on how to make good use of a question, how to handle it. Erica, I hope that answered your question. If not, please leave a comment and I will take another stab at it. Really enjoyed dealing with this kind of a question because it is something that I really have been nagging myself about for a long time. I think it's something that's really valuable, and I hope you will start honoring your questions too with main cards in your Zettelkasten. Thank you. Bye-bye.